out as quickly as possible. Let's get going. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Walkthrough PLC. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here for this event. As a reminder, please keep your phones away throughout this event, be respectful, and just try to learn something from today. First, we're going to introduce the Walkthrough High School Choir. The piece we're about to perform is based on a poignant, anonymous text found written on the wall of a cellar near Cologne, Germany, where Jews hid during World War II. The text expresses deep hope and enduring love in the darkest of hours. Many of our students were able to perform this piece across Europe last summer, and we thought it would be fitting to share with you today. Here's the Walkthrough High School Choir.
Director of the Institute for Holocaust Education. It is our honor to be here during our Week of Understanding, where we provide testimony about the Holocaust. When the program began over 15 years ago, we exclusively used survivors, those direct victims of the Holocaust. Today in Nebraska, there are 8 survivors left. The youngest is 85, and the oldest is 99. Only one of them continues to speak, and that is the one who's 85 years old, but on a very limited basis. As a result now, we are using what are called 2Gs and 3Gs, second generation and third generation speakers, the children and grandchildren of survivors. One of those is here today. His name is Jim Berk, and he'll be speaking to you in a moment and telling the story of his mother, a survivor of the Holocaust. Jim is originally from Lincoln, Nebraska, which he'll actually share with you in a moment, now lives in the Detroit area. The story of his mother is very gripping, and I hope that you'll benefit from it. At the Institute for Holocaust Education, we stress empathy, understanding, and that you learn to be an upstander when called upon. We believe that with the lessons of the Holocaust, those lessons learned from the Holocaust, you can and will change the world. So please join me in welcoming Jim Berk.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Okay? All right, great. It's so good to be here back in my home native Nebraska. I was a Lincoln East graduate back in the 70s. I'm an old guy. And I'm so delighted to be back here and getting a taste of Valentino's again, which I missed for so many years. So anyway, it's a pleasure to be back here. Just a brief history about me. When I left Lincoln, I went to the University of Texas. I got a broadcast journalism degree. I was in radio and television for a number of years. I covered a lot of sports in the South. I lived in Florida, Texas, Louisiana, and Michigan for the last 40 or so years. And I got a chance to really interview some really cool people when I was in sports. I covered the Lions when Barry Sanders, I interviewed Barry Sanders quite a bit, the Red Wings, the Pistons when they won the championship in '89 and '90. So I've been around a lot of very interesting people, a lot of VIPs in the sports world. So I'm blessed to be with you here today. And I'm so privileged to be speaking to you today as a second-generation survivor, the son of an incredible woman, remarkable woman, who survived the horrors of the Holocaust. What you're about to hear is a remarkable story of a tough, smart, resilient woman who witnessed death all around her, yet wouldn't give up, wouldn't succumb to fear or despair, and did everything in her power to save her sisters and her mother, and succeeded. She also did her best to save others, helping keep their hopes alive amidst the Nazi terror. This is the story of my beautiful mother. Ilona Dorenter was born in Kędzierzyn, Czechoslovakia in August of 1918. She was the second of 7 kids, 6 girls and 1 boy. But at an early age, the family moved to Újság. Ungvar was the Hungarian term. River city. Új means river and Horod is city. And this is a picture of the city. Next slide, please. You can see the river which bisected the town. These are pictures of it's now part of the Ukraine. Next slide. Okay, this is my mother's grandfather, Mayor Grunstein, his wife Nehe, and Aunt Zura. My great-grandfather was a successful businessman. He sold cigarettes and wine. And maybe that success and popularity created perhaps some anti-Semitism, some Jew hatred toward him because his life at one time was endangered. My great-grandfather traveled to Hungary and he met with the Emperor Franz Joseph, whom he knew. Don't ask me how he knew him, but he knew the Emperor. Emperor Joseph helped my great-grandfather, giving him some men for protection. He lived a long life into his 90s, riding horses, I was told, at age 92. Mayor Grunstein had a daughter, Hani, and this is my mother's mother, Hani. Now, Újság, next slide, was a beautiful city with a population of about 20 to 25,000. The river bisected the town. My mom's family lived in a bank building next to one of these bridges. I don't know which side it was. They had an apartment with a balcony. The river divided the old city and the new one. The Jewish community began here in the 16th century. It developed and expanded in the 18th and 19th century. Now, my mom's father, Jacob, was a retailer of meat. He was a very religious man. He was president of our synagogue, or of his synagogue, I should say, very well known in the community. Jews totaled about 7,000, which was about a third of this town's population. The first language that my mother spoke was German, and it would significantly help her in her life. She also did speak Hungarian with her mother. Now, these were some of the pictures of what life was like in Usharod. There's another picture with the river bisecting the town. Next slide, please. Okay, there's another picture. And next slide. Okay, this is the main drag in town. This would be like the main street in town. There are a lot of restaurants and shops and businesses on this thoroughfare. Next slide. Okay, this is one of the synagogues in town. As you can see, it was a beautiful building, wonderful architecture. Next slide, and here's another picture of the synagogue in town. Next slide. And here's the big hotel in town. My mom and her older sister, Idush, they went to dances at this hotel when they were growing up. Now, my mother was very good at mathematics and drawing at an early age, but sewing became her passion as a youngster. She was forced to work when her father, Jacob, died very young when my mom was a teenager, and I was named after my grandfather. My Hebrew name is Yaakov, which translates into Jacob. Now, after the Nazis ascended into power, Czechoslovakia was eventually annexed by Hungary in 1938. My mom was 20 years old, and she would start to see signs of trouble. We should get the audio, hopefully.
Sorry. It says unavailable. I apologize.
Unavailable? Okay. Okay, it didn't work yesterday. Do you want a flash drive? Would that help?
I have the flash drive.
I brought one too. You know, in television, when I was in television radio, we had a lot of problems like this with microphones, with audio, and with video. So, you know, we had to kind of improvise a little bit. You know, one of the things, and I'll talk to maybe more about this a little bit later, but I'm seriously considering, I'm in the process of starting to write a book on my mom's story, because there were so many miracles, number of miracles that happened, allowing my mom to survive in concentration camps. And I talked about Germany, my mom being able to speak German, and that really helped her to be able to translate in the camps. Talking between the Nazi guards, the soldiers, and the prisoners, and she was able to translate. So she was very useful. So just in the last several years, I started to take German now, Guten Tag, and that's really helped me, and it's kind of drawn me closer to my mother. Any chance that we're going to get this en route?
It's loading right now.
Okay, all right. So I'll tell you one other story, and I'll mention more stories during my presentation. But this is a story that that really resonates with me, and I just learned this just a few years ago when I interviewed my aunts, my mom's sisters, and this will all kind of come into focus later on in the presentation. This is not part of the presentation, but I'll tell you anyway. Just we're trying to buy a little time here.
Jim, it's
in
not,
the last
it's not
concentration camp that my mom was in, the Germans were losing the war. This was April of 1945, okay? My mom and her sisters and their mother were herded onto a train, a cattle car, okay? And they were sent back and forth on a short track, okay, from about maybe a mile or less in a 24-hour period. So they were going back and forth 24 hours, so the whole day and the whole night on this train, okay? So you're in this train track, in this train. You're bolted in, and you have no food, no water, just horrible conditions. And you're starving to death, and the Germans were losing the war. They probably knew it, okay, obviously. They stopped the train. They herded everybody out of the train. Everybody got off this boxcar, this cattle car. They put everybody into a circle. Is it working? Okay. So, all right, that's okay. We'll make it work. I'll finish my story. So they herded everybody into a circle, and they brought out their machine guns and their weapons. They were about to kill everybody. Just then, two motorcycles ride up. They were part of the Swedish Red Cross delegation, okay? And they say, stop, we have papers that will allow us the authority to gather these people right here in front of you. We have the authority now, they're now ours. So my mom is just probably seconds away from being killed, and Swedish Red Cross saved them. So that's just like one miracle that happened to my mother. So my mom would say in the audio that you couldn't hear, she said Jews were not allowed to eat anything and to buy anything from like the grocery store until like 10 in the morning. So the grocery store would open at 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and all the good food would be taken away. So Jews would be allowed to get the food at about 10 or so. So it was picked over. So again, that was just one form of anti-Semitism. So every year became more difficult for the Jews. 1940 and 41 was still okay, according to my mom. 42 was worse. 43 very bad. My mom's family might have been deported in the early 1940s, but she took matters into her own hand. She traveled to Budapest to get papers allowing her family to stay out of harm's way. Now, my mom tells the story of how she got all dressed up. She put on her best clothes, her makeup, her lipstick, her perfume, and she made dates with all these men who had the authority to give her these papers, okay? So she got the papers to avoid deportation. Did she keep the dates? No way. She was on the train the next morning, but she got it. She got what she wanted. Meanwhile, my mom's sewing profession was doing well, but again, a Nazi crackdown was imminent. She could have avoided any trouble by getting out of the area, but my mom felt an obligation to her family.
I had tremendous connection. I could have saved my skin, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't leave behind my mother and my sisters. I wasn't brought up that way.
Thank goodness the audio works. That's great. Okay, so in April 19, next slide, in April 1944.
But after God,
okay, can you go back? Okay. Yeah, okay. So in April of 1944, during the holiday of Passover, all Jews of Usherod and surrounding areas, including my mom's family, some 25,000 people were rounded up. They were sent to a newly created ghetto outside the city, which was once a brick factory and a lumber yard. My mom was not one of them, however. Somehow she avoided it. She tried to fake her own death. So she threw her coat and some personal papers into this river. Her sisters initially thought that she had drowned. My mom hid overnight in a building. She prayed that her deceased father, Jacob, would come to her in a dream and tell her what to do. She didn't know what to do. The dream never materialized. So next day, my mom gave herself up, and she entered the ghetto, much to the surprise of these guards outside. They were probably saying, who is this crazy lady giving herself up and entering the ghetto? You wouldn't want to be in the ghetto, right? But she did. And why? Because she felt an obligation to her family. She felt empowered to do whatever she could to help other people.
but after God knew what I did, and that's why I'm alive today. I had forgotten about my own sorrows because I was busy with others. Mama said one day to me in Auschwitz, I said, Mama, I have to take the coffee away from you. And Mama said, why you won't come? I said, Mother, a woman is dying there, and she wants a little coffee, I have to give it to her. But I'm your own mother. I said, Mama, you're gonna die, God will help you, I have to give it. And I gave her that water, and she died, but I felt good about it, that I pleased her. That was her last wish.
Now, my mom's family spent about 3 or 4 weeks in the ghetto. Then, in May of 1944, they were transported on a train to Auschwitz. spending 3 days and 3 nights on that train. Can you imagine the only nourishment that you would have was what you could have smuggled inside your clothes? And then, most of all, would be starving in that horrible situation. So once they arrived in the concentration camp, they were forced into lines. And you can see the lines, next slide, right there. And there in one of these lines, she came face to face, next slide, okay, with the infamous Dr. Next slide, Joseph Mengele, the angel of death, the man in charge of the selection process. To the right meant temporary safety and forced labor if you were strong, if you were able to work for the Germans, okay? To the left meant instantly to the gas chamber if you were young, if you were elderly, if you were weak, and then through the crematoria where they would burn your corpse. It wasn't good in the Nazi eyes if you had a physical or a mental disability. So if you had a limp or anything like that, or you walked with a cane or anything like that, very bad. So my mom's sister Zisela broke her hip as a youngster. So she walked with a limp, which would not be good as they're approaching this selection process. My mom herself had sprained her ankle just prior to this trip, and she was walking with a cane.
But when I came to Auschwitz, I stood out from the line and I looked, said right, left, Dr. Mengele is selecting people. And when I saw throwing out mothers and children and younger people and old people, throwing them out, I threw away the cane. I said, God forgive me. I threw away the cane and I said to Zisa, to my sister with the force, Zisa, walk straight, it's bad. And when we walked, Dr. Mengele said, Arbeitsfähig, that means good for her. And then he took her neck out and he says, die links, she's lame, left. And I said, das ist meine Schwester, Moment mal sie. That's my sister, where are they taking them? And he said, they are taking them to a place where you don't have to work so hard. And I couldn't see.
Mass killings by the Nazis began as shootings. Next slide. Einsatzgruppen and killing squads started their work in 1941. Then it transformed into gassing, which took away some of the psychological trauma by the perpetrators. And in Auschwitz, with no working crematoria, in mid-1942, the camp was engulfed by the sickening smell of rotten body parts spilling out of mass graves. So the Nazis built 4 operational crematoria up and running in 1943, where they would burn the bodies. You can see the chimney right there, where the smoke would come out. Imagine this, 4,400 corpses turning into ashes within 24 hours. Next slide. This is Zisela, Saranka, her Hungarian name. Look how beautiful. Sent to the left, murdered. Age 22. This is Yidu. Yanur, his Hungarian name, my mom's brother. Also murdered. 16 years old. My mom tells the story of that train ride into Auschwitz. She said Yidu was on his sister Zisela's lap, praying and crying the whole way, so fearful of what might happen. My mom said she wasn't crying. She was already trying to figure a way how to get out of the mess that she was just in. Next slide. So in this photograph taken by Nazi guards just after arrival on the Hungarian transport, May 1944, my mom is on the far right there with the arrow, the white scarf on her head. That's a picture of my mom. These pictures were discovered after the war. They were taken by Nazi guards at Auschwitz, okay? They were put into a book. You can buy the book. It's called the Auschwitz Album. We had an exhibit at the Holocaust Museum where I'm connected with in Detroit about 13, 14 years ago, and I saw this exhibit on the wall, big picture like this, and I started breathing really hard. I almost fainted. I saw a picture of my mom. I knew it was my mom, okay? So I saw her in that, and then I said it to her, and she verified that that was it. That first night in the camp, my mom said it was the worst night of her life. She got a cold shower, and she was shaved all over, just not on her head. Next slide. And here, with another arrow pointing, you can see the picture of the woman with the shaved head. That is also my mother. Okay, she was painted with a red stripe on her back, and she was given a uniform. My mom said it would not fit. It was either too big or too small, given no underwear, no panties, no bras, nothing, just a rough cloth suit. My mom tells the story of knowing one woman in the camp who was gorgeous with twin kids. The kids were a year old. The kids had been gassed to death, okay, and later burned. The mother wanted to touch the electrical wires surrounding the camp and die. She did not want to live. She wanted to commit suicide. My mom said she was so busy keeping this woman safe. She tried to help others, and that made her forget about her own problems. Next slide. In Auschwitz, forced labor was intrinsic to the Nazi culture of persecution. Inmates worked in administrative, service, or clerical jobs and skilled trades and crafts. Outside, they worked in factories, mines, and on roads. Needless to say, no one received any kind of payment for any kind of work. Thousands upon thousands of men and women perished in these slave labor conditions from hunger, dehydration, exhaustion, and disease. Others were beaten or shot to death or had guard dogs attack them. Next slide. Okay. My aunts tell me that they were forced to carry stones in the camps. If you weren't fast enough, they would sick the dogs on you. Unfortunately, though, my aunts tell me they were never bitten in any of these situations. Now, in Auschwitz, my mom became useful in so many ways. She befriended a Blockelster, that's the head of the block, and she became a Stubendienst, which is a maid in block number 26. She helped sew and also clean instruments for a dentist in the camp named Urga. My mom said she was even forced to stand next to this Mengele, who I pointed out earlier, and give him some water or a towel to wipe his forehead. Can you imagine standing next to this monster as he's making these selections? And eventually, my mother's mother, Hani, arrived in Auschwitz. She wasn't on the original transport. You know how the family was reunited? My Aunt Rita found her own mother sitting on the toilet in Auschwitz. Later, next slide, my mom saw Peretz, her half-brother, Peretz on the right, Helen, wife Helen, and their two kids. Peretz had been separated from the family, and he asks my mom, so how are Helen and the kids? My mom said, they're with us. They're fine. But my mom hid the truth. The truth was the wife and kids had already been sent to the gas chamber. Later, my mom and her sisters would find out that Peretz died in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. How did he die? The Nazis ground up glass, okay, and they put that in the bread. So when you eat the bread with this ground up glass, it's very likely chance you're going to die, and that's how Peretz died in Bergen-Belsen.
One of the first nights went out, and I knew they were going to the crematorium. They were lying, they were kissing me, they were hugging me, and I knew they were going to the crematorium. I can tell you that was the saddest day of my life, and I saw 800 children walking out in a rain and straight to the crematorium. They all didn't go.
Mom and her sisters not only had to deal with their own lives, but also trying to save their beloved mother, this is Hani, who was middle-aged, and because of that, more likely to be selected for death. One day in Auschwitz, Hani fell off the top bunk bed in the barracks. She hit her head hard, causing a gash. My mom and her sisters were able to take care of the wound without any of the guards knowing it. And they were able to hide her in blankets in the barracks during roll calls to avoid the unthinkable, which would save her life. My mom said she once wiped some red paper on her mother's face to give her some color, make her look a little younger and more presentable. Now, organizing, next slide, which was gathering something valuable and bartering it for extra food or privileges, became a real way to survive in these camps. My mom said she would pick up cigarette butts off the ground and pool them together to make a larger cigarette and maybe sell for some extra bread. You were always in business in these camps, and if you were in business, you were able to survive more than likely. Now, life was brutal in these camps. camps. Beds consisted of wooden shelves, next slide, no mattresses, minimum straw bedding. My mom said it was always best to get the top bunk because if you were on the lower bunk, you would be subjected to diarrhea falling from above. Now, roll calls, next slide, were at the beginning and end of each day. They would often last for hours and hours, adding to the extreme fatigue and torment. Can you imagine? You know, you're in a starving situation, you have to stand for hours and hours like this. Camp uniforms with vertical gray and blue stripes were made of rough cloth, never washed or changed, with dirt and sweat infested with lice, inadequate to protect one from the harsh, cold weather. Now, my mom did so much to help save the lives of others. I'll give you some examples. My mom at one time was in charge of spooning jam off bread in a food line, okay? So my mom would take her finger and give a little bit extra jam to those people in that food line, always trying to do a little bit more to help people. She once took a potato from her own mother and gave it to a starving girl. Someone complained, how can you take that from your own mother? My mom said, because this woman needed it more. Another time, a young girl was destined for death. Her family asked my mother for help as they were standing in line during one of these roll calls.
I said, Mama, you hold the line. I have to go into the block and take a rope.
She meant a band. She meant a band.
You know, when you have that in your hand, you are doing this. And I said to the woman, when I came back, I said, you wait here and be close with your daughter. The daughter was out inside and she was outside. And don't cry and don't make any noise. I will do what I can do. So I brought the stewardess, Ben, and I said to her, tell your daughter that she should fall by my feet. And when she falls by my feet, I will put this on her left hand. And then she should raise herself up and I will hold her hand and one of my sisters will hold her hand and she will become a stewardess. But she was a little shorter than me. I said to raise herself and be a stewardess. And that's what happened. So help me God that I'm telling you the truth. And she was there and I saved her for that day.
During her 5 to 6 month stay in Auschwitz, my mom recognized an old friend from years before, whom she had a crush on. His name was Miller Bondi. It was just a platonic relationship, not anything romantic. But he was in a position of power in the camp. He was a capo, which was head of the unit. Now, see, the Nazis gave certain prisoners more privileges, a little bit more food or more clothing to control the masses. These capos had a little bit of power. They were still prisoners, but they had a little bit of power, okay? So my mom's head was shaven, as you can see in this photograph, okay? And my mom was embarrassed by her appearance, and she worried that this Bondi, this capo now, this guy in a position of power, would not recognize her.
So I bought a little pillowcase, right? A pink one and a blue one. Pillowcases you could buy from the people for little bread. You give up the bread, and I made myself a dress with my sister's help and a little kerchief. And if I have a kerchief and a dress, maybe you'll recognize me. And I says, Bondi, you have to help me. I am so-and-so, and I know you, and I met your mother and father, and the Dr. Shomadis was introduced. I says, you have to help me. And he says, I can give you bring you a bread. No. You have to help me, because I have seen you with a Schreiberin. Maybe you're engaged, you're married. I wish you good luck. This was a nice little clean romance between us, and you don't owe me anything, but I want you to help me get out my family. And he promised me that he would talk to the Schreiber. And I that day, and I was introduced to the Schreiber, that's the secretary, and to the head, the larger orchestra, the head of the head, and the two women knew me. And they said, when good transport comes, that's the only way to get mother out. When a transport comes, and they know it's a transport, not to the crematorium, they let me know.
And Bondi was able to do it. Get her onto a transport of about 3,000 out of that horrible camp. It most assuredly saved her life and the lives of her family. Now, my mom was in Auschwitz for about 5 to 6 months. Auschwitz located in Nazi-occupied Poland. At the end of October, beginning of November 1944, 8,000 women were evacuated from Auschwitz-Birkenau and transported to Bergen-Belsen, which was in Germany. My mom and her 3 sisters and her mother were among them, and so was Anne Frank, the young teenage author who would later become very famous because of her diary. Maybe some of you in the audience have read the diary of Anne Frank. So my mom and Anne Frank were in Bergen-Belsen at the same time. A very cool fact here. They didn't know each other. My mom was 11 years older than Anne at the time, and obviously Anne did not become famous until after her death. But they were in the same camp at the same time.
So when we came back to Belgium, it was heaven. The food was delicious. There was no theater, no roll call. We didn't have to get up in the morning. We could talk, we could laugh. We even were cooking in our minds. Chicken paprikas and this and that. If we get out, we would get out and never take care of our figure. We would just eat and eat.
My mom was very lucky in Bergen-Belsen. She made herself very useful. She used her trade to stay alive, and she actually made a suit for a Blockelster, and she also did the same in Auschwitz. So life was a bit more bearable for my mom in this camp. My Aunt Ethel, my mom's sister, said, let's try to stay here. It's good. But my mother's mother said no. Hani was a very wise woman, and she had noticed that every day the food given out was dwindling and dwindling, becoming less and less. And as I said, my mother's older brother, Peretz, who would have been my uncle, died in this camp. So the stay in Bergen-Belsen was short, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. Shortly before Christmas, 1944, my mom and her family were on another transport to Braunschweig, okay, which was also in Germany. This is one of the sub-camps of Ravensbrück. The camp dealt with steelwork, specifically making airplanes. My mom worked in a factory. She had to take an elevator down into salt mines underground. She was positioned on a big machine, and her job was to use a tweezer to pick up small ball bearings and place them in a hole.
It came to me. I never had glasses in my life. I'm very good with my hand because I really, what I was doing, you know, needs fun. I could do it. It was nothing for me. I was doing it. It was nothing. Just, you are the one. Now, every day you come to that machine and you start doing it. And I was very happy. The 3rd day when I was there, or the 4th day when I was there, I got such terrible pain in my arm that I just missed it. And they had to stop the machine and they pulled me out. And I told him, Herr Oberst, I said, something is wrong with my arm. And I had a tiny little thing. And he said he will bring me a black salve. I put on a black salve and pus came out. Like, you know, if you've seen soda water, they squeeze, it came out pus.
My mom was infested with lice. You see, Braunschweig consisted of a large stable which was unsuitable for habitat during the winter months. The roof leaked and rain and snow constantly fell into this stable. Can you imagine? No heat, horrible cold conditions. The women had to sleep on the floor, which was covered only with straw. The straw was infested with lice. So soon everybody was covered with bugs and bites. My mom said she got the lice at Bergen-Belsen, but it became worse at Braunschweig. So worse that the doctors wanted to amputate her arm. They told my mom that within 10 days, the infection would hit her heart, killing her, unless she got penicillin medication. The diagnosis was ominous. The future looked so bleak. And I'm sure there's no great supply of penicillin in these camps, right? Because why would you want to save a Jew when it was so easy to kill one? My mom, I'm sure, was scared. It was her younger sister, Margaret, who provided the hope as the war was nearly over.
She put her hand over my mouth and she said to me, Rachel, the Russians are here, the Americans are here, the English are here. A few days and you will be free. Don't go. don't let go. She started to scream. I said, please, don't tell me anything. I don't want to hear it. You will live, she says, immediately free. And when she sat there, I got such a power. Why should I die now when I'm so close to freedom? Why should I die now?
And it was at Bendorf, the 4th camp that my mom was in, transferred there in 1945, February of 45, that she got the penicillin that saved her life. The 5th and final camp that my mom was transferred to was the sub-camp of Neuengamme. It was called Oxenhall. This was solely for female prisoners. These prisoners work in armament productions, making guns and ammunition on metal processing machines. I'm not sure my mom did any of that because at this point she was very, very weak in condition-wise from her experience. At the very worst of her concentration camp experience, you're not going to believe this, she registered 55 pounds. She weighed 55 pounds. As a 25-year-old, that's probably double, triple, a half or a third of what all of you weigh, okay? I mean, just unbelievable. My mom was lucky, okay? Needless to say, were she not lucky, I wouldn't be talking to you today. So in the spring of 1945, as the war was winding down, Sweden was instrumental in helping save lives. Count Folke Bernadotte, part of the royal family, is credited with negotiating the release of tens of thousands of prisoners from German concentration camps. The rescue was under the auspices of the Swedish Red Cross, and the mission used white buses, painted all white, with a Red Cross emblem on the side. This was done so they would not be mistaken as a military target. Another hero who helped save Jewish lives was Hillel Storch. He was a key representative of the World Jewish Congress. His initiatives led to the liberation of thousands of concentration camp inmates and their subsequent transfer to Sweden. It was Bernadotte and Storch who helped save my mother's life and the lives of her 3 sisters and her mother, who would later become my grandmother. And as I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this presentation, the Swedish Red Cross came up with the 2 motorcycles, and my mom was just maybe seconds away from instant death, from a firing squad or from a pistol or rifle, and Folke Bernadotte's group saved her life. Now, en route to Sweden was a brief stop in Denmark in April of 1945. Here, I believe, photographers captured another picture of my mother. First row here, second from the right, okay? It's kind of a grainy photograph. Now, I'm not positive, I wouldn't bet my life on this, but knowing my mom's face, her countenance, her stature, her posture, I really believe that that's a photograph of her. So after this, the Swedish Red Cross took her to Stockholm. While she was recuperating, hospital personnel went around to the beds. They asked patients what they wanted.
So one woman said she would like chocolate, so they wanted chocolate. The other woman said she would like figs, so she would like this or that. They came to me. One woman said I would like cigarettes, everybody had it. Another, I came and I said, I haven't seen the magazine for quite a while. I would like to know the fashion. I wanted to know the fashion. So Mrs. Matterson said, you must be a very good designer if you want the fashion, because there's so much in life what you could have. But they wanted to give me, but I wanted the fashion magazine.
And if that doesn't show devotion to her profession, I don't know what does. So around 1947 or 48, my mom wanted to thank Bernadotte in person for saving her life, so she went to the Royal Palace in Stockholm. My mom was turned away, not allowed in. They were probably thinking, who is this crazy lady walking up and knocking at the front door? My mom came back another day, still not allowed entry. But true to form, exhibiting that never-give-up attitude, my mom tried again, and finally on that 3rd attempt, she was let into this royal palace. She got a meeting with the Count. She thanked him. He said, don't thank me, thank Hillel Storch. He talked me into getting that transport. My mom told the Count that she was a dress designer. Count Bernadotte said, you can start right now. And my mom did, with dressmaking at the Royal Palace. My mom was also introduced to Hillel Storch's wife and went to work for her as well. According to my mom's testimony, she was invited many times to their Friday night Sabbath meals. Now, on this third trip to the palace, when she finally got in, my mom met Princess Sibylla. Princess Sibylla had a little boy running around, maybe 2 or 3 years old at the time. That boy's name was Carl Gustaf. Carl Gustaf is now the King of Sweden. So my mom knew the mother of the King of Sweden. Pretty cool. Okay. Now from Sweden, next slide, my mom moved to Paris. There she worked for a while in dressmaking. My mom eventually came to America in the 1950s, and here's a picture, next slide, of my mom's sisters. My mom is second from the right. Idush, the oldest, is on the far right. She avoided the Holocaust. She married a non-Jew, and she was a school teacher in Czechoslovakia. My mom is on the second from the right. Aunt Margaret is on next to her in the middle. In the white is Aunt Ethel, and on the far left is Aunt Rita. Okay, those are my mom's sisters. I'll tell you a quick story. Ethel, in the white here, my mom's mother was sent to a holding cell in Auschwitz, okay? And this is the next step was the gas chamber. So my Aunt Ethel in the white here, she goes out of her barracks, okay? She goes into this holding cell and screams. There's probably a couple hundred people screaming, crying, whatever, wailing. They knew what was going to happen to them in terms of death. And she goes in there, she screams, "Mommy, Mommy, are you there?" Her mother hears her. She leads her out of this barracks, back into the holding, back into their own barracks, and that probably saved her life. Incredible story. So she was, and I'll tell you one other story of Aunt Margaret. She's in the middle, and she's still alive. The one in the middle, okay, still alive. She's 98 right now. Most all of my mother's sisters were very good at sewing. Aunt Margaret got a job with Oleg Cassini when they were in New York, okay? When they came over to this country, got a job with Oleg Cassini. Some of you might have heard of Oleg Cassini if you're into fashion. He was the dress designer to Jackie Kennedy, the First Lady, JFK's wife, okay? So my Aunt Margaret, in the middle there, worked on the dress that Jackie Kennedy wore to the Pope's funeral in 1963. True story, standing right next to Jackie, fitting her. Very cool story. So my mom was living and working in New York City dressmaking. She wanted to return to Europe. She was a little homesick, okay? She was all set to go back to Sweden to live. But she said, you know what, I've never seen Florida. I'm going to go down to Miami. So she flew down to Miami, and lucky for me, she did. Because in December 1952, she arrived in Florida in Miami Beach. Next slide, okay? Okay, and her hotel was overbooked, okay? So they sent her to this hotel, the Sovereign, okay? And it's still there today. If you're familiar with Miami Beach, it's very close to the Fountain on Collins Avenue in Miami Beach. This was my dad's hotel. Next slide. Okay? So my father was a Grand Rapids, Michigan native. He grew up, he was in the paint wallpaper business. He was living in Chicago. They came to him in the 1940s and his company, and they said, we're opening up a new franchise in Lincoln. Okay? He said, do you want the franchise in Lincoln? He said, yes. So my dad moved to Lincoln. He was working in Lincoln, downtown, right on O Street at Gold's Department Store. Some of you might have heard of that. Your parents probably did for sure. So my dad was staying at this hotel, the Sovereign, okay? He was out on the beach in the wee hours of the morning when my mom arrived. She wanted to take a look at the ocean. As fate would have it, they met. And I guess it was love at first sight. Next slide, because 3 months later, they were married. And about 1.5 years after that, I came into this world. My mom continued to work and thrive in her fashion career. Next slide. Okay, she was now living in Nebraska. This is a shot of her, 1969. Okay, she would tirelessly sew and create new dresses, working in the sewing room, as we called it, was just adjacent to my bedroom in Lincoln. My mom had a small clientele of very affluent customers, and at her peak, she would make and sell a dress for $3,000. Now, that's a lot of money right now, but back in the 60s and 70s, that was a whole lot of money. Next slide. She even hosted a fashion show highlighting her exquisite dressmaking talent. Here's the invitation for the 1966 event, which was held at our house. I lost my beautiful mother in December of 2013 at the age of 95. I held her hand in the final moments of her life, and I thought about how those hands did so much in her remarkable time on earth, helping support her own family, growing up, using those hands to help save others in others' lives in the concentration camps, cooking and cleaning in our house, and yes, to maybe dress me up on occasion. Who is that cute little guy? And also to create masterpieces in fashion. In March of 2016, I returned to Lincoln to speak at a reception honoring my mother's work. It was an exhibit showcasing a dozen or so of her dresses that I donated to the University of Nebraska after her death. As you can see, the colors, the fabrics that she created were so beautiful. I remember vividly that wherever she traveled, she would turn heads when wearing these outfits. How proud I was of her and how proud I continue to be of her. And my dad too. As you can see by these photographs, they made a great looking couple. Slide. Here's a couple of photographs. You can see on the bottom one, you can see the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean in the background. This is Miami Beach, pretty close to where they met. Next slide. And another couple of pictures of my mom and dad. My mom continued to talk about her experiences to schools, to groups. She lit candles on Yom HaShoah Day, that's Holocaust Remembrance Day, at the state capitol in Lincoln. And there's a couple of pictures of us. It goes without saying that I'm deeply blessed to be speaking with you today, telling my mom's incredible story. I hope by doing so I can, in a small way, enlighten the world about the horrors of the past and to encourage everyone to believe that we can all make a difference in today's world so this never ever happens again. Thank you so much for your time.
Jim, as always, it's an honor for your mother's story. Truly a story of survival. I once asked our director, our former director, Beth Dotan, about your mother in a picture, and she said, every one of them had it happen, when you met her, you would know what a force she truly was. We'd like to open this up to questions. I'm going to turn it over here to find out how long we want to run this.
So if you'd like to ask a question, just approach one of the mics kind of one at a time, and we'll take turns from either side. So if you have any questions, come on down and approach the mic.
Well, I'll start the question and answer session off. A lot of people ask me, they said, was your mom religious? Did she believe in God after all of her experiences? You know, because some people, in terms of Holocaust survivors, they either get turned off to the belief in religion, they said, where was God during this time? Or they get more pious, more religious. My mom was tending more toward the latter. My mom got very religious, very pious. We spent many times in synagogue. So the Holocaust, the fact that she lost two brothers and a sister, didn't turn her off to the belief in God. Okay, that's a question I get all the time.
I noticed in a lot of the pictures, like a lot of aunts and things like that, was were the family members reluctant to talk about that time period, or did it vary from family member?
It's a really good question. Some people do not like to talk about it. It's such a traumatic experience. But my mom, and it was kind of like a dichotomy. My mom had nightmares at night. I remember growing up, and she would always complain of nightmares of going through this horror overnight sleeping. But yet, she loved talking. She loved talking about her experiences. And I'm so blessed to have that aspect, because now I've learned so much more about my mom's experiences, and I can tell them to all of you when I do these speeches, and also potentially the fact that I'm eventually going to write a book on her experiences as well.
Come on up, come on up.
that's a really good question. My mother was a very angry woman. I mean, she was very beautiful in so many ways, but she was easily agitated, easily angered, and I think that the concentration camp experience really traumatized her to the point where, a sudden noise or something would really startle her. And I got that a lot. So it was a tough relationship growing up with my mom in many respects because of that experience, that traumatic experience during the Holocaust. But yet, toward the end of her life, our love became much more genuine and much stronger toward the end of her life.
How old is she as of right
My mother passed away 10 years ago.
At what age would she be at
Well,
now?
how old would she be? She would have been born in 18, so she'd be coming up this year, she'd be 106. Yeah, had she,
now? Her mental health affect relationship with
well, it was a tough relationship growing up because, again, she wasn't an easy woman to get along with because of these experiences. She had a lot of love for me, of course. She loved me. She gave me, everything I wanted. She, raised me very beautifully, but yet it was like a tough love. It was, a love where she demanded excellence and professionalism, and that's because of the situation that she was in for all those years as well.
What would you name your book?
That's a really good question. I thought about titles. That's a great one. I just thought about this the other day. I think I'm going to maybe lean towards something about miracles because I sat down and I thought about how many miracles my mom had to go through to eventually live and eventually give birth to me. So the fact that I'm alive is like a double miracle. So I think miracles is going to be in the headline, and also tenacity. Tenacity because she wouldn't give up. And again, that's a lesson for all of you. If you're faced with dangers, if you're faced with a situation that's untenable and you have to get through, just never give up. Just fight through it. Get through it. And you will. If you have toughness, if you have resiliency, if you have a tenacity, you can accomplish so much in your life. Look what my mom did. She basically was near death, and she became a wonderful seamstress and dress designer. And I say this all the time, had my dad relocated, and my dad had a business on either coast, like New York, East Coast or West Coast LA, my mom would have become a very big fashion designer. Okay, along with maybe Dior, Christian Dior, Hugo Boss, some of those Calvin Klein. My mom was that talented.
Jim, what lesson would you want us to learn from her story?
And I think it's along the same lines of never giving up, Scott. I think she did everything in her power. She wouldn't take no for an answer, okay? And that's a lot of times. And that was kind of like that tough love that I received growing up. She would never take no for an answer. So I think the lesson she would try to say is to just stay strong in your conviction in whatever you're fighting through, whatever you're fighting for. Be strong. Be true to yourself. Be yourself. And just know there is a God. There is somebody that's looking out for you. And if you have that faith in God, if you have that faith in humanity, that there are better people. I mean, one of the things I think my mom would recognize that, yeah, there's a lot of bad things going on in the world. You know that. I don't have to tell you that. But there's more good people than evil people in the world. It's just that the evil people make it so bad for the rest of us, okay, in many, many ways. So keep resilient and keep understanding that there's goodness throughout the world. And I think that's one of the lessons.
Any more questions? Let's thank our guests one more time. At this time, we ask that very carefully, let's have our Wahoo students head back to class.